The thing about living on the edge of civilization, and Mara Kowalski genuinely meant the edge, because her family's sheep farm sat at the very tip of northern Montana where the map basically gave up and turned into blank white space, was that absolutely nothing interesting ever happened there. Until it did. It was a Tuesday in late November when the sky cracked open. Mara was 23 years old, perpetually irritated, perpetually cold, and perpetually stuck. She had grown up telling herself she would leave this farm the second she turned 18, and then the second she turned 19, and so on until she'd run out of seconds and found herself still here, feeding sheep at 6 in the morning in weather that would make a polar bear reconsider its life choices. She had on 4 layers: thermal undershirt, flannel shirt, heavy wool sweater, waxed canvas jacket, and she was still cold. The wind came in from the northwest like it personally hated her. Snow had been falling for 2 days straight, soft and relentless, piling up past the fence posts, erasing the road, swallowing the barn's lower windows. The farm's old radio had gone out the day before. Her cell phone had 2 bars of signal, and she was conserving the battery. The nearest town, Galway, population 340, closed on Sundays and most of Mondays, was 22 miles away. Her truck was buried under 1.5 feet of snow and probably wouldn't start anyway. She was, in a word, stranded. She'd accepted this. She had hauled water for the sheep, thrown down extra hay, checked the propane tank, worryingly low, and was walking back from the barn to the house when she heard it. Not thunder. Something faster, sharper, a sonic boom that shook the teeth in her jaw, then a long screaming whistle like something enormous tearing through the sky. She spun around and saw a streak of orange light arc across the gray clouds, bright as a welding torch, dropping at a steep angle toward the tree line on the far side of her north pasture. Then a sound like a very large, very expensive thing being destroyed, and a column of snow and steam exploding up through the pines. Mara stood still for approximately 4 seconds. "Oh, for crying out loud," she said, and went to get her rifle. She told herself it was a meteor, or a satellite, something boring and explainable that she could call in to the county sheriff once her phone had signal and go back to her day. She was not going out there in this weather because she was not the kind of person who walked toward mysterious explosions and blizzards. She had her rifle, her headlamp, her emergency kit, and her dogs, Biscuit, a 4-year-old border collie, and Sergeant, a 12-year-old arthritic Australian shepherd who had no business being out in the cold but refused to be left behind. She had on every layer she owned. She was furious at herself. She was going anyway. The north pasture was a 1/4 mile of shin-deep powder. She used the fence line as a guide, moving slow, head down against the wind. The dogs ranged ahead of her, noses working, tails up. Sergeant was limping but game. Biscuit disappeared into the tree line and started barking, a specific, urgent bark that Mara had learned to take seriously. She pushed through the first rank of pines and stopped. The crash site was about 40 feet across. The trees on the perimeter were scorched at the top, bent outward, still steaming in the cold. In the center, half buried and tilted, it wasn't a meteor. It was a vehicle. She was almost certain it was a vehicle. It was roughly the size of her truck, but shaped like nothing she had ever seen. A flattened ovoid, all smooth curves and dark material that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, with panels that had split open on one side like the petals of a broken flower. Steam or smoke, she couldn't tell which, rose from the damaged section. There were markings on the hull. Not letters, not numbers. Something else. "Okay," Mara said quietly, to nobody. Biscuit was still barking. Sergeant had gone completely silent, which was somehow worse. Then the cracked panel moved. Mara raised the rifle. Her hands were steady. She was her mother's daughter, and her mother had taught her that hands could be steady even when the heart was going completely insane. Something unfolded from the wreckage. Long limbs, too many angles. A figure that stood upright, humanoid in arrangement, arms and legs in the right places, but wrong in proportion. Taller than she expected, slender in a way that made her think of tall grass bending in wind. The skin, what she could see of it, was a deep charcoal gray, textured like ash bark. There were 4 eyes, 2 standard height, 2 set slightly lower, all of them with amber irises that caught her headlamp and glowed. It looked at her rifle. It looked at her. It looked at the dogs. Then it dropped into the snow. Not dramatically. Not like a movie villain falling in slow motion. It just sat down in the snow, hard, like its legs had decided they were done. It caught itself on one arm, and she could see, even from 15 feet away, that the arm was shaking. "Don't move," Mara said. The creature's 4 eyes focused on her. Its mouth opened, a wider jaw than a human's, she noticed, and it seemed to have an extra joint. What came out sounded like static layered under something almost melodic, and then, clunky and strange but recognizable, in English. "I was not planning to move." Mara blinked. "You speak English." "I have translation capability," it said, with the labored quality of someone reading from a phrasebook while running a fever. "Inadequate at present. My systems are," it paused, searching, "damaged. As I am." She lowered the rifle slightly. "Slightly. Are you dangerous?" The creature looked at her for a long moment with all 4 of its amber eyes. "I crashed a starship in your field. I am not currently dangerous. I am currently cold." It took her 20 minutes to determine that. 1. The creature could not walk back to the farmhouse under its own power. It had a leg wound, something from the crash, a long gash along what she supposed was its thigh, leaking something dark and viscous that wasn't quite blood but served the same apparent purpose. 2. It was getting colder by the minute. The temperature was dropping fast, the wind picking up, and her headlamp was showing her the steam of her own breath in rapid, worried puffs. 3. The creature, once she'd gotten a better look, was not dressed for Montana in November. It was wearing something that seemed to function like a suit, close-fitting, flexible, with panels of darker material at the joints, but it was thin. She could see it shivering, or something like shivering, a rapid, fine tremor that ran through its long limbs. "What's your name?" she asked, because she needed something to call it. Another pause, that searching quality. "My designation does not translate. The closest approximation in your language, more silence, would be Kael." "Mara," she said. "That's my farm." I surmised. "You crashed into my north pasture. I apologize. I'm going to have to dig your ship out of my tree line in the spring. Again, I apologize." She crouched down to look at the leg wound, and Kael went rigid, not aggressive, she sensed, just alarmed. She held up both hands, rifle slung over her shoulder. "I'm not going to hurt you," she said. "I'm trying to figure out if you're going to bleed out in my snow, which would be a whole different problem." Kael looked at her hands, then at the wound. The tremor running through its frame was getting worse. "I require warmth," it said, like this was difficult to admit. "My biology, I am." The translation system seemed to be struggling harder now. A species adapted to higher ambient temperatures than this. "I am losing function. You're going hypothermic. If that means what I believe it means." "Yes." Mara straightened up and looked back through the trees toward the farmhouse, invisible in the dark and snow. Then she looked at Kael, 6 feet of gray-skinned, 4-eyed alien sitting in a Montana blizzard, shaking. "Can you stand it all? If I have assistance." She held out her arm. Kael looked at it for a moment. The way, she thought, you might look at a rope bridge over a gorge, calculating whether it would hold. Then it reached out and wrapped long fingers around her forearm. Its hand was enormous compared to hers. The fingers were cool and smooth, like touching stone in winter. She pulled. Kael pushed. They got it upright, and it leaned heavily into her, which was both alarming and, given the physics of the situation, necessary. It was at least 8 inches taller than her and considerably lighter than expected. Either its bone structure was different or whatever it was made of was less dense than human tissue. "Lean into me," she said. "We're going back to the house." They moved through the trees, slow and halting. Biscuit ran circles around them, unable to contain herself. Sergeant limped steadily at Mara's heel. "Your animals," Kael said, after a long moment of just walking. "They are not afraid." Biscuit isn't afraid of anything. Sergeant is too old to bother. They are remarkable. Don't tell them that. They have enough ego. The farmhouse was not impressive by any objective measure. It was old, built in the 1940s, added to haphazardly over the decades, wood-paneled walls and drafty windows and a kitchen that still had the cast iron stove her grandmother had cooked on. But it was warm. The wood stove in the living room was loaded and going strong, and the orange light through the windows looked like the most beautiful thing Mara had seen in years. Getting Kael through the door was an adventure. The doorframe was not built with 7-foot gray alien warriors in mind, and Kael had to duck in a way that seemed humiliating for both of them. Inside, She sat it down on the living room floor. The couch didn't seem like a good idea yet, close to the wood stove. Kael held all four hands toward the heat and went very still, and she could see the fine tremor in its limbs beginning to slow. "Don't touch the stove," she said. I understood that without the warning. I wasn't sure. She hung her coat by the door and began stripping off layers. "I'm going to get the first aid kit. I don't know if human medicine will do anything for you, but I'm not leaving that cut untreated." "The compound I require is aboard my vessel," Kael said. "I can describe it." "Great. I'll add it to my shopping list. In the meantime," Kael said, with a kind of stiff dignity, "I am grateful for your assistance." Mara paused in the doorway to the hall. She looked back at the alien sitting on her living room floor, thawing out, her old arthritic dog pressed against its leg for warmth, which neither of them had asked for. "You're welcome," she said. She cleaned the wound, dark and strange, the fluid that came from it staining her cloth a deep violet. But the cut itself was mechanical-looking, clean edges, responding to pressure the way any wound would. She wrapped it with what she had. Kael tolerated this with no complaint and an impressive amount of stillness. "Does that hurt?" she asked. "Yes." "You didn't make any noise." Making noise would not have helped. She sat back on her heels and looked at it. Kael looked back with all four eyes, which she was starting to find less alarming. They were expressive, actually. Right now, they were doing something she was beginning to read as cautious assessment. "What were you doing?" she asked. "Before you crashed." A pause. "I cannot share that." "Military." Another pause. "Something like that." "Were you in a fight?" Kael's eyes moved, all four of them, independently, in a way she found both weird and oddly compelling. The crash was not from enemy action. System failure. A cascade from a navigation error. Something in the translated voice that might have been embarrassment. "I made a mistake." "What kind of mistake?" "I was searching again, moving too fast in atmosphere." "Overconfident." "I have been told that I am overconfident." I did not listen. "Join the club," Mara said. "I've been told I'm stubborn for 23 years, and here I am." "Still stubborn?" "Still stubborn." Kael was quiet for a moment. The fire crackled. Outside, the blizzard threw snow against the windows in long, sweeping gusts. "You live here alone," Kael said. It wasn't quite a question. "Most of the time. My parents retired to Arizona. I run the farm." "By yourself?" "By myself." "And you walked into the trees, alone, in the dark and the storm, when you saw my crash." "I brought the rifle." Kael looked at the rifle, which was leaning against the wall near the door. "Against what you might have found in those trees." "Against whatever I might have found," she agreed. "You were afraid." "Of course I was. But you came anyway." Mara shrugged. Seemed like the thing to do. Kael was quiet again, that assessment quality in all four eyes. "You are a peculiar human." "I'm a perfectly normal human," she said. "Montana just makes people weird." The problem presented itself around 10 o'clock. Mara had checked the propane, even lower than she'd thought, which meant she was on wood heat only for the foreseeable future. The wood stove was keeping the living room warm, but the rest of the house was cold enough to see breath. Her bedroom, down the hall, was manageable but not comfortable. Kael, for its part, had sat in front of the wood stove for 3 hours and still hadn't entirely stopped shivering. Not the hard tremor from earlier, but a faint, persistent thing that she kept noticing in its hands. "Your ambient temperature tolerance," she said. "What's normal for you?" "Approximately 30 degrees warmer than this room. Currently." "You're still cold." "I am significantly warmer than I was. But yes, my biology does not recover quickly from cold exposure." She thought about this. The wood stove could only do so much. She had one electric space heater, and it was running in the bathroom to keep the pipes from freezing. She thought about the blizzard outside, forecast to run through tomorrow. She thought about the propane. She thought about the sheep in the barn, which were better insulated than Kael at the moment. She went to the closet in the hall and hauled out every blanket she owned, which was many, because she was a practical woman who lived in Montana. Wool blankets, heavy quilts, a sleeping bag rated to -20. She dumped them in front of the wood stove. "Here," she said. Kael looked at the pile. "What is this?" "Blankets. Warmth. You wrap yourself in them." "I know what blankets are," Kael said, with a dignity that somehow survived the situation. "I am questioning the quantity." "You need the quantity. You're still shivering." Kael picked up a heavy wool blanket and looked at it. Then, With the same careful precision it had applied to everything so far, it wrapped it around its shoulders. The shivering was still there. Mara looked at it for a moment. She thought about her grandmother, who had been a practical woman, and what her grandmother would have done. Her grandmother would have just done the thing. Okay, Mara said. Move over. Kael looked at her. What? Move over. I'm sitting with you. She grabbed 2 quilts and settled down on the floor next to it, back against the stone hearths around, pulling the quilts over both of them. Body heat. You need it. I'm not letting you freeze in my living room. There was a long, charged silence. You are. Kael started. Don't read into it. It's practical. I was going to say that you are very direct. Also practical. She got comfortable, which was relative given the floor, and pulled the quilt tighter. Biscuit immediately capitalized on the situation and crawled under the blanket across both their laps. Sergeant settled against Kael's opposite side with a heavy sigh of canine contentment. Kael sat very still for a moment. Your animals, it said again. What about them? They are pressing against me. They like warmth too. And you're warm now, comparatively. Another silence. Then, slowly, like something that required significant internal processing. This is acceptable. High praise. The fire popped. The wind howled outside. Mara pulled the quilt up to her chin, and Kael adjusted the wool blanket with great precision, and they sat in not quite silence, the blizzard providing plenty of its own noise, in front of the wood stove. After a while, tell me about your vessel. Kael looked at the fire. What do you wish to know? How bad is it? Honestly, a pause. The propulsion system will require significant repair. I have emergency communication capability, but it is at reduced function. I have sent a signal. It will be received. Another pause. Eventually. Eventually. Weeks, possibly. The distance involved. Right. Mara processed this. So you're here for a while. It appears so. She nodded. Outside, the blizzard howled. Inside, the fire cracked and settled. You're going to have to help with the sheep, she said finally. Kael turned to look at her. All 4 eyes. I do not know what sheep are. You're about to. By morning the storm had buried the door handle, and Mara had to shove her way out with her shoulder. Kael stood in the doorway, successfully ducking this time, and watched her dig a path to the barn with an expression that had enough visible astonishment she could read it across species. You are doing that, it said. Sheep need water. Sheep need hay. Sheep don't care about blizzards. Can I assist? She looked at it, still limping, still moving with a certain careful economy that suggested things hurt. Can you carry 2 5-gallon buckets? Yes. Then yes. Kael carried the buckets. Mara led. The sheep reacted to Kael with spectacular alarm, a wave of panic bleating that rolled through the barn like a stadium wave, which Kael found deeply confusing and Mara found extremely funny. They don't know what you are, she said. Neither do they know what you are, by their evident fear response. They know me. They've just got short memories. She moved through the barn, talking quietly to the ewes, and the panic settled gradually. Talk to them. Kael looked at a sheep. The sheep looked at Kael. What should I say? Doesn't matter. Just keep talking. Low voice. Kael said something that the translation unit rendered as a low, rhythmic sequence of sounds, almost like a prayer or a song. The nearest ew's ears swiveled forward. She took a step toward Kael instead of away. Huh, Mara said. What? She likes you. Kael looked at the ewe with what Mara had started to identify as its version of pleased surprise, something in the way all 4 eyes focused slightly differently, a softening of the jaw. She is, not what I expected. They have a kind of intelligence. They really don't, though. That's what makes them remarkable. 3 days in, the translation unit started failing. Not completely. Kael could still communicate, but with longer gaps, more searching, occasional substitutions that made no sense. I require the heat mechanism for the wood stove. Your animal that limps for Sergeant. The white disruption for the blizzard. Mara started filling in. She'd say a word. Kael would look at her with all 4 eyes, and she'd mime it or gesture to it or use context until something clicked. It was, she realized, a lot like how she'd communicated with her grandmother toward the end, when language had started to slip. Patient and repetitive and strangely intimate. She taught Kael to play cards. Rummy, specifically, because she had a deck and it was something to do in the evenings. Kael had no understanding of the concept of games initially. The purpose is to lose intentionally at intervals, and then became extremely, borderline alarming good at it once it understood pattern recognition was involved. "You're cheating," she said, on the fourth evening. "I am not cheating. I am calculating." Same thing. It is objectively not the same thing. It feels the same thing. Kael's jaw did the extra joint thing that she'd started identifying as a suppressed smile. Your emotional response to losing is disproportionate. I'm not emotional, I'm annoyed. Those are not mutually exclusive. She threw a card at it. Kael caught it without looking. Of course it did. On the fifth day, she woke up before dawn because Sargent was breathing badly. She'd known it was coming. He was 12, which was old for an Australian shepherd, and the cold had been hard on him. She sat on the floor of the living room with him in her lap, his big head against her knee, and felt the slow, labored rise and fall of his ribs. Kael woke, as she'd noticed it often did, without any transition, one moment asleep, the next entirely alert. It sat up and looked at Sargent. Then at Mara. It didn't say anything. It moved closer and sat beside her, and Sargent's tail made one slow wag, and then went still. They stayed like that for 2 hours. Kael didn't speak. Mara didn't need it to. The fire was low. She fed it without getting up, just reaching and adding wood. Sargent's weight warm and familiar and decreasing. At some point before sunrise, it ended. Kael helped her bury him. The ground was frozen hard, but Kael could exert force that Mara couldn't, and the translation unit was almost absent now, but it didn't need to be present. They dug beside the fence line where Sargent had always preferred to walk, and Mara wrapped him in a wool blanket, and that was that. After, standing in the snow in the early morning gray, Kael said, with great effort and with gaps, "On my world. When we lose a companion, we pause, long pause, we speak their name. We say they ran ahead. Not that they are gone, that they are ahead of us, and we will find them." Mara looked at the fence line, at the snow. "Sargent ran ahead," she said. Kael made a sound, low and resonant, not translatable, something that wasn't language but was clearly in the same register as prayer. They walked back to the farmhouse. On day 9, Kael's communication device recovered from the wreck on day 2 and spent most of the time crackling quietly to itself in the corner, made a different sound. Kael went rigid. Then, quickly, went to it and held it, and a rapid exchange happened in Kael's language, melodic and layered, nothing the translation unit tried to render. Mara watched from across the room, Biscuit beside her. When it ended, Kael set the device down and turned. "They received my signal," it said. "When are they coming?" 11 days. 11 days. She did the math. That was 20 more days in total. Nearly 3 weeks. She looked around the farmhouse, the extra blanket on the floor, the card deck on the table, the 2 mugs on the kitchen counter. "Okay," she said. 11 more days. Kael watched her. "You are searching. You are not distressed." "Why would I be distressed?" "I have intruded. Significantly. I crashed my vessel in your trees. I have consumed your food and your heat and your time for 9 days. You've also carried water buckets every morning, won a frankly unsettling amount of card games, and helped me bury my dog." She looked at it. "You've pulled your weight." All 4 amber eyes did something quiet and complicated. "Mara, don't get sentimental. We still have 11 days." She asked, on day 12, because she was curious and she'd earned the right. "Have you met humans before?" I had been briefed, Kael said. "Your species, your biology, your communication. I had data, but not actually met one." "No. Were we what you expected?" Kael looked at the fire. The translation unit was running better now. It seemed to have done some kind of repair that Mara couldn't follow. The data, it said, was accurate in some respects. Physiologically. Socially, less so. The data suggested your species was contentious, fragmented, suspicious. We are all of those things. Yes. The data did not. Pause. The data did not suggest that you would walk into dark trees in a blizzard carrying a rifle to check on something that crashed. The data missed some context. The data missed many things. Kael's eyes were doing the complicated quiet thing again. It did not mention that your species buries its companions in wool blankets, or teaches aliens to play card games, or, an even longer pause, shares warmth without being asked. Mara said nothing. Biscuit was asleep with her head on Kael's knee. "I would like," Kael said, carefully, "to speak of this world to others. Of this." It gestured, and she understood. The farmhouse, the fire, The storm outside. All of it. If you would permit it. Sure, she said. Tell them about the sheep too. The sheep, Kael agreed, with its suppressed smile jaw thing. It came down in the south pasture, as Kael had arranged, a vessel twice the size of the first one, moving with a silence that seemed impossible for something that large. It landed without drama on the snow, and the contact light it used was a warm amber that painted the whole field gold. Mara stood at the fence line. Biscuit sat beside her, watching with great interest. Kael came out of the house, moving better now, the wound mostly healed, the limp nearly gone. It stopped beside her at the fence. Your people are prompt, she said. They are delayed. They were supposed to arrive yesterday. Are you going to get in trouble? For the crash. A pause. Yes. Overconfidence. As noted. She looked at the vessel in the south pasture. Will you? She started, and stopped. I do not know, Kael said, without making her finish. The distance involved. The time. Another pause. But I would like to. That's not an answer. No, it agreed. It is not. She held out her hand. The same gesture she'd made in the trees on the first night. Kael looked at it, then wrapped long gray fingers around her forearm, the way it had when it needed help to stand, except now neither of them needed help. Thank you, Kael said, for the warmth. She thought about saying something practical, something Montana-appropriate and unsentimental. Sergeant ran ahead, she said instead. Kael's grip tightened briefly. Then it released, and turned, and walked across the snow toward the vessel in the south pasture, amber light turning everything golden. Biscuit pressed against Mara's leg. Don't even start, Mara told her. Biscuit wagged, which was an answer of its own. The vessel rose without sound, became a point of light, became nothing. Mara stood at the fence for another minute, in the cold, in the enormous quiet that a Montana winter makes when you let it. Then she turned and walked back to the farmhouse, Biscuit at her heel. The 2 mugs were still on the kitchen counter. She washed both of them, slowly, and put them away. Outside, the sky was clear for the first time in weeks. She leaned on the counter and looked out the window at the stars, all of them sharp and close and impossibly numerous, and thought about data that misses context, and warmth that doesn't require permission, and dogs who run ahead. After a while, she turned the light off and went to bed.